Hey guys, it's Pineapple, and sorry it took so long for me to do this. I was annoying weird Twitter users that are making this chapter about something that it's definitely not about, but let's get into this chapter so we can talk about everything happening in the backstories of All for One and One for All in this really highly intensive lore-filled chapter that I personally really enjoyed before all the weird discourse. So let's get right into it, first starting off with the origin of quirks. Now in chapter 407 of MHA, we see the official origins of quirks and how they first appeared in the series, but even with what we see, we don't get the full picture of how exactly this phenomenon started. Hundreds of years ago in modern day Japan, a sex worker started to feel sick and began suffering from the effects of a strange STD she contracted from someone that she can't even remember. This origin allows for there still to be a level of mystery to how quirks originally started, since we have no way of knowing who infected the mother and how many other people might have been affected before her and after her. We also have no idea how this man, who we'll be referring to as Patient Zero, was infected or altered himself, whether it was by some sort of animal like a rat biting him and passing on the quirk gene, or it was something more alien in nature. The spread of the quirk gene through rats might actually still be a completely viable theory, because as far as we know, this sex worker was the only person infected with a complete quirk gene at this time. Her body begins to grow strange protrusions and growths from it that are actually small bits of her quirk activating across her body, but when this woman eventually dies, Horikoshi makes an effort to specifically tell us that what happens next is a swarm of rats approaches her trying to eat her before All for One and Yuichi get washed away, but we'll focus more on their part of the story in a bit in the next section of the video. Now when these rats came to eat from Mom for All's carcass, it's possible that some of the rodents actually did get to eat from her body, and that this would have caused the latent quirk genes in her DNA to spread as a sickness to the mice, who were also likely washed away and spread through different areas in Japan where they'd get into people's food and continue to bite others or spread the gene through their waste until it started to spread into the general population much like a virus. There's credence to this because we know that within a year quirks started to appear among newborn babies who were likely infected by their mothers, but quirks would also start to appear in young people going through puberty, meaning whatever virus it was that carried the gene didn't need to be activated at birth, causing quirks to spread even faster more and more, and humanity struggled to deal with the rapid level of change these new powers presented in society. Now researchers trying to understand what exactly was happening to humanity studied the genes of quirk users and hypothesized that whatever it was that infected them with these abilities changed the genetic structure of their DNA and created a new sub-branch of humanity. However, this announcement itself created hate and differences between the normal people and newly powered people of society, dividing humanity into two groups as the world evolved into war and chaos as quirk users were treated like disgusting infected monsters and no longer welcomed as part of society. In these times, armies of non-quirk users were formed to guard all population centers as war began to break out, but at the same time, the most powerful quirk user for the next century was beginning to move. The birth of One for All and All for One. Taking it back for a moment to the beginning, we arrive at the infected sex worker. Unbeknownst to her, the weakness in her body that she was experiencing wasn't coming from any sort of sickness or the growths appearing on her body, but instead, they were the result of growths appearing in her body, as without knowing it, the woman was pregnant with two babies. The narrator tells us that these babies are sucking away her life force slowly but surely, and inside the womb we can see two children, one very small and one much larger than the other one, who lay in the fetal position still as innocent as can be, where they'll stay for a while longer until two of the world's first quirk users ever are born. When the twins inside of her are born, the mother dies immediately by the side of a river under a bridge somewhere in Japan. With no one around to help or even really care, her two babies laid there on the ground beside her, and in any other situation, the mother and her babies would have wasted away, drastically changing the events of our story. However, one of the children, the one that would go on to become All for One, was born with a sense of survival that was surpassed by no other, as All for One moments after his birth crawls up his mother's body, holding onto his baby brother, and steals her quirk using his own, allowing him to create drill-like protrusions from his body that he uses as teeth to rip into his mother and take her milk for himself. With this being how All for One was born, from the very first moments of his life, he resented anyone that wasn't able to do something for him or give him something, since even his mother was only able to give him life, and he grew up in this period of chaos where nothing, not even the next meal, was guaranteed. This led to All for One gaining a growing hatred for humanity in general and anything that wasn't useful to him, since nothing had ever been given to him in his life. It all had to be taken. In the chapter, we see as All for One uses his mom's quirk to tear apart a group of anti-quirk resistance fighters, and it's not like he's on the side of the quirk users because he also terrorizes them and steals their quirks, leading to a small confrontation between him and his little brother Yuichi, who he kicks away rather easily. The origins of One for All and All for One. This is where we enter the most interesting section of the chapter for me, and that's the true origins of who Yoichi and All for One are as a person. First, it's notable here that Yoichi never calls All for One by any name. He just calls him Big Brother, and we've never gotten a name for All for One throughout the series. With the death of his mother right away and the fact that they were never actually named, it's clear that All for One was the one that named his little brother, who was his first ever belonging. But we actually don't know if All for One gave himself his true name during this section of the story, despite the fact that we know he eventually did give himself the last name Shigaraki. We learn that the reason Yoichi is so weak and stays that way throughout his entire life is that All for One took all the nutrients meant for him in the womb, leaving his brother with only what he needed to survive. But during their childhood, if you were to ask All for One, he'd tell you that he loves his little brother, and you'd probably see him protecting Yoichi against anyone that tried to take him away or threaten him. However, this is not for good reasons. It's not the usual kind of love that a sibling feels for their sibling. In this case, it's more like the love someone has for their favorite toy or their favorite shirt. The years go by as All for One continues to steal quirks and becomes more and more powerful, having an unnatural advantage against even the most powerful quirk users of the first generation, since quirks have only gotten to the level of power that they have now through generations of mixing and building up, meaning those early quirks would have been no match for someone that could even use 2 quirks together, let alone an entire library that could be combined to make even greater effects. While they're still young, Yoichi and All for One live inside of an abandoned bookstore in a building that'll eventually crumble away due to the damage it's taken. However, in this bookstore is where we see one of the most important objects in the story of My Hero Academia, the Captain Hero comic book. These comics are Yoichi's first and only ever possession, and in the pages told the story about a hero that fought against an evil demon lord and went through horrible struggles in the first volume. However, as the story goes on in volumes 2 and 3, ultimately the hero comes out on top. Yoichi says he loves these books because the art shows you the hopes and dreams of the people in the drawings, which are a window into the hearts and dreams of those who work so hard on the books. And seeing something that his brother loves that wasn't actually his, All for One started to show interest in these books, as Yoichi continued to believe in All for One's good side somewhere deep inside, because when they were babies, he has a vague memory of All for One holding his hand when as a baby he dragged the both of them up onto their mother. The symbolism of a villain and a hero reaching their hands out to each other or taking each other by the hand is repeated often in My Hero Academia, and will be again, of course. So it's nice to see a repeated here of Yoichi thinking that there has to be some humanity inside of his brother, specifically because of his outstretched hand. Eventually, we pick up the pace in the timeline as you skip ahead to when All for One and Yoichi were teenagers, as we ourselves have to go back for a moment. 1 year after Yoichi and All for One were born, a glowing baby was born in a hospital, leading to the first recorded birth of a quirk user. This was before quirks began to spread between young adults and activate, causing the glowing baby to be listed as the first official quirk user, a status that would gain them support over their lifetime and would lead to them amassing over 10 million followers as they grew up and started to lead their own faction against the anti-quirk groups of society. Seeing how the glowing baby was being touted as the first quirk user, and specifically how popular he got, enraged All for One, who told Yoichi that just 2 weeks ago, 50 babies were born in India with meta abilities. A chilling fact for All for One to share, since it's possible that All for One, with his ability to fly, could have visited Japan to steal the quirks of these babies, and could actually be doing this already in Japan without anyone realizing it, to continue to pump up the numbers of how many quirks it is that he has. We know that at some point, giving into his jealousy, All for One stole the quirk from the glowing baby, who was now an adult, and took it for himself, telling Yoichi that he killed the glow quirk user. When Yoichi asked him why he did this, he says it's to be more like the demon lord in the comic book, saying that in the book the hero had to hide his identity and battle all alone. However, everyone on Earth had to pay tribute to the demon lord. They had to give him things and pay attention to him. With his powers and his control over humanity, he could never be alone and never be without the things it is that he wants, the things it is that he feels are owed to him. So it's not a wonder why All for One will idolize his figure instead of the hero in the book, especially given that he didn't read the rest of the story on purpose, because the demon lord winning was the ending that he wanted. All for One tells Yoichi that like him, he too now has a dream, all thanks to his brother and his stories, as All for One now wishes for a world that exists for him and his sake alone. But we know that things didn't go so smoothly for him at all. It's here we cut forward in time quite a bit in the chapter itself. However, over the course of the series, we saw what came after this in between these last 2 pages, as over the years to come, All for One would amass more and more supporters and use his ability to take and grant quirks to make himself impossibly powerful, while using using the deals that only he is capable of making to gain influence in society during a time with no heroes and no one there to lead quirk users to freedom. For years into adulthood, All For One began his dark rule over Japan and caused a revolution to form against him that would eventually strike back with the quirk user Kudo at its head, storming One For All's bases and finding Yoichi behind a door that he expected to find the Demon Lord in. From here, we all know the story of Kudo taking Yoichi's hand and that being the beginning of One For All. However, after Yoichi was able to give the quirk to Kudo and pass it on, we know that All For One was faced with a terrible situation. On the last page of the chapter, we see Yoichi running away from Kudo, holding his hand and leading him to safety. As All For One sees this in his mind, he questions why his brother is running away and wonders who this man is that's taking his brother away, thinking, he's mine, look at me. In his mind, when his brother refuses to turn away, he thinks, if you refuse to be mine, then, and on the last panel of the chapter, we see Yoichi's hand floating in a cloud of blood, clearly separated from its body that was vaporized, leading us to believe that All For One was actually the one to kill his own brother by accident, something that we theorized ever since we got the flashback of All For One crying while holding the second user by the neck. Where do we go from here? From here, we still have to see how exactly it was that All For One killed his brother by accident and the battle between him and the second user, as well as just how Yoichi passed the quirk on in the first place and how Kudo passed the quirk on to the user of Fanjin before he was taken down by All For One. As part of this flashback, I could see us going all the way up to the modern day, since of course the battle between All For One and All Might is really important to this story as well. If I were Horikoshi, I'd really take my time with this flashback and extend it quite a bit so we could see All For One's journey through time and how he became the man that he ended up being, with us seeing All For One's battles against every single One For All user leading up to All Might. In MHA, the All Might versus All For One Prime battle is like our version of Madara versus Hashirama. It's been set up the entire series. We know it was the most devastating fight the world has ever witnessed, and we've gotten everything from 2 rematches to this fight to even Deadpool referencing it in him and All Might's crossover manga. It's about time we finally saw what happened on the day that All For One nearly came to an end. And if Horikoshi really intends to wrap this story up without leaving anything on the table, I think we'll be seeing it soon. This was a fire chapter of My Hero Academia. I love the massive lore drop that we got in this chapter and the window into All For One's character that helps me feel like for the first time I truly understand him and his motivations and no longer feel like he's just evil and possessive to be possessive. Paired with the information that quirks influence the personality of their user makes it make perfect sense how someone with a quirk that allows them to take what makes a person special for them would ultimately end up becoming the kind of person that All For One did when they grew up in the sort of environment that he did. It's all too understandable yet still indefensible, and here's hoping Horikoshi keeps it up with this good humanization of the monster that is All For One as we near the end of the MHA manga. Sorry for not doing a full chapter spoilers video before the chapter came out like I usually do on Thursdays. I had Naruto Storm connections early and wanted to record a bunch of gameplay that you can check out on the channel, and make sure to come back for daily rank matches for the rest of the year, as well as checking out my recent full story video on the fight between Dabi and Endeavor and how the Todoroki family comes to an end. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoyed my review. It helps me stay motivated to do another video on the chapter next week instead of diving 100% into shorts, and stay tuned for even more uploads every day. This is Pineapple. I love you guys. Please follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram at Vocal Pineapple, and peace.